has been in business 30 years. We design and manufacture custom disc brake systems and components for race cars, high-performance street vehicles, ATVs, motorcycles, and utility vehicles. Anything having to do with brakes, the rotors, the calipers, the rotor hats, master cylinders, we produce all of those components. And basically what's brought us here is the fact that over the years, with the evolution of custom wheels becoming more and more open, the market desires nice looking brake components as well as parts that work well. So we find ourselves in a market where we need to use coatings and paints to basically make aesthetically pleasing brake components and ones that will withstand UV and typical environmental conditions.
Our system is 10 tanks that we submerge our parts in. We rack our parts on racks that actually are dipped into the tanks. The tanks are approximately 86 gallons each. The 10 tanks consist of 2 that are cleaners, 4 that are water rinse, 1 that's a paint tank, and 2 that we call permeate or drag out tanks. And how this works is we start with a chemical cleaning tank where we dip our parts in for approximately up to 2 minutes. They'll stay in this tank. Then they'll be pulled out of this and put into a rinse tank to rinse off this cleaning solution. The cleaning solution has no VOCs in it, and it's a pyrene 1205 SD from Chemtol that we use. It's 5% of the tank is the cleaning solution. The rest is city water, just regular water that we mix it with. Next is just a water rinse where we rinse off the majority of that. Then we put it into a tank that has sulfonic acid in it, which is 2% acid. The rest is 98% water, which neutralizes the cleaner and makes sure that the surface of the material is clean. Then we go into another city rinse, which is a tank full of regular city water. Then we go into a DI rinse tank, and the DI rinse tank with a chemical in it called Rinse Aid. Again, the Rinse Aid has no VOCs in it. And it's basically Rinse Aid is like your fabric softener you put in your wash machine. It just sheets over the metal and makes it smooth so it's easy to adhere the paint to it. Then we put it into our actual paint tank. And in the paint tank, it's the coating is put on electrically. We have in it sheets of mesh that are anodes that we have hooked up to a rectifier, and then a bar that we hook our parts over, which is the cathode. And we put that on for about 2 minutes. And the voltage varies the thickness varies according to the voltage and the time in the tank. And we're looking for a coating thickness of approximately 10 to 15 microns. 1/1000th of an inch is 25 microns. So it's very, very thin coating we put on this. It goes in there, and when it comes out of that tank, it actually, what happens is the coating adheres to the metal, and after a certain amount of time, it's got that buildup of 10 to 15 microns. It electrically insulates the part, and no matter how much time we put on it, that coating thickness won't get any bigger because it's electrically insulated. So we pull it out of there, and what's on that is the electrically deposited paint on it, and it also has what we call a cream coat, which is part of the paint that does not adhere to it. So when we dip it in our permeate tank, it removes that material, and we take it into our next drag out, we call drag out tank number 2, which removes the balance of the paint that's not attached to it. And those tanks recirculate through an ultra filter that separates the paint from the permeate, and it filters back over into the paint tank. So we don't lose any of that, we don't get rid of any of that. All that paint is recovered. We use about 98.5% of all paint that we put in our paint tank. It's not lost, it's either on the part or it's recovered back in the paint tank. Then we have a rinse tank that we do a final rinse on just to take off anything that might be on it. We let it air dry, we put it in an oven, and we cure it at 340 degrees F for 30 minutes. That's the process. And I brought some samples if you'd like to see some of the stuff that we do. I brought a sample that is not coated, and one that is coated. And this is a race roll. It's a little heavier, it's iron, okay? And that's coated. And the reason we do this, it coats everything. It's everywhere. Their throw power throws this paint in every little nook and cranny, corrosion or anything happening to the parts. Yes, that part is aluminum. The brake rotor is an iron rotor. That's my rotor.
Actually, I'm still laughing about the idea of aesthetically pleasing brake components.
Well, you know, when you
Flowers on it.
well, it's not that aesthetic. Yeah.
Okay, it's basically what you're looking at versus if you go out in the parking lot, what you'll typically see on an OEM vehicle is a rusty-looking piece of metal.
And this will not rust. And people that build custom cars and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on their custom cars, they want the inside of it. You know, they got spokes that you can see all inside now and everything. They want everything behind that to look pretty also. So that's our process.
Okay, thank you. Does the board have any questions for the petitioners? You don't have a mic.
Yeah, we do. Oh. Yeah, without a recording. So I'm speaking into, I guess, Roberta's ear. I have a question for one of you gentlemen. First of all, were you aware that there was a requirement to obtain a permit? I noticed that one was not obtained until the district found out that you were operating the system without a permit.
Apparently, we had a misunderstanding between a previous manufacturing engineer and whomever they were speaking to at the county. And apparently in the discussion, it didn't come up exactly what we were electrostatic coating. So no, we didn't realize that we thought we were under the limits and then found out that there was no limit for, quote, auto components.
Okay. Second question, what do you do with your rinse water? Do you do countercurrent rinses? Do you recycle it? Do you have some kind of RO unit, electrolytic systems of recovery?
The rinse water, once it gets contaminated, we evaporate it and we take the sludge and have a company that we fill it up in a barrel, and a waste company comes and hauls it off.
Okay, so then in terms of the rinse water, is it a closed loop system or
It's
do
a
you?
closed loop system, yes.
It is, okay.
Yes, we have to actually add water to it. There's no pipes going into it to add or discharge water.
And then do you have any control systems on your exhaust when you dry the components?
No, sir.
You do not, okay.
That's where, I'm sorry, that's where the VOC actually, that's where the majority of the VOC goes up when it's cured.
Right.
It burns off the solvent,
Right.
cross-link.
Who else does this type of work that you guys do? I mean, is there another company within Ventura County, within the Tri-County area?
We have several companies in, I'd say, Los Angeles County that does them. They're not automotive people, though.
They're probably, what, electroplaters?
Electroplaters, we do a lot of companies that are in-house. We have some small jewelry companies. We have, one of our major business right now is the faucet industry. So many of the faucet industries in LA uses our process.
Okay,
High
but
end.
is there another company that conducts the same kind of, process and provides the same type of operation that you do right now for their clients?
For what, I'm sorry?
Is there another company that does what you do? I guess that's the easiest way to say
Oh,
it.
competition?
Yes, there is. And where are they located? Any of them?
I would say most of my competition is in Detroit.
Oh, it is. Okay, so you're the only one maybe in the Ventura County area?
I believe so.
Okay. That's all the questions I have at the moment. Thank you.
Do any other board members have questions of the petitioners? Mr. Herlock?
I have a couple of questions. Wanted to understand, the gentleman on the right. Did you say your name is Selchuk?
Osadchuk.
Osadchuk. But you are a representative of the vendor of the
Yes, sir.
materials, is that right? Okay. I want to make sure I got that clear. has your, has the company received notices of violation?
Yes, we have.
You have, okay.
Yes.
For what?
Violating Rule 7418, that we're above the I believe it's 420 grams per liter, and we're at 440 grams per liter with the SR paint that we're using.
Now, if, you know, part of the background, and I presume that you've read both the staff letter and the draft variance order.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything in those that, particularly in the draft variance order, that you have a problem with or disagree with?
No, sir.
Part of the background is that the district is planning on submitting a rule change to the board tomorrow. How was it decided to ask for a permit for a year? Or not permit, for a variance for a year? I mean, if the variance is, I mean, if the rule changes, and I'll ask the district this if you don't know for sure, but if my understanding is if the rule change is approved tomorrow, and I understand it could be approved tomorrow, then you will basically be in compliance as soon as your permit to operate is approved.
At the time we applied for the variance, there was no plan that I understood for a rule change.
Okay. Are you doing anything to come into compliance other than waiting for the rule to change?
Yes, Clearclad Inc. is, and their paint supplier is working on another coating that has less VOCs than the 440. It's like 360, I believe, is what they're working on, but they're in the middle of testing and doing a lot of work on that. They've given us this time frame where they think that it'll be completed. But there's no guarantee on that either, that, you know.
This would be a similar product that was below the 420.
That is
Yes.
correct. You were very thorough in describing the process in terms of what was in them until you got to the permeate tank and the 10th tank. Are there any organics connected with either of those two tanks?
Yes, that's where all organics are in the paint itself.
The 10th tank you called the permeate tank.
Okay, I'm sorry?
The permeate tank?
Permeate tank. There's a paint tank and then there's two permeate tanks.
Okay.
And a permeate is the HSR without the pigment in it. It's DI water and it goes through an ultrafilter system that this filter system can separate the pigment out and the permeate out of it and puts it back in to the permeate tank. It puts it into drag out number 2. It's the same that's in the paint tank except it has no paint resin in it. So what this does is it cascades from permeate tank number 2 into permeate tank number 1 and then into the paint tank. And as it does this, it pushes any of the paint resins that we've drug out of the paint tank when we were rinsing. It pushes it over these what do you call them?
Weirs?
Yeah, it pushes them over and puts the paint back into the paint tank. That way we don't lose any of our paint particles, any of our resins. It's the same material. It's in the paint tank. It just doesn't have the resinous material in it.
Mr. Gasparino asked you about whether you do anything to control the emissions from your stack. What do you do to control the fumes in and around the operation inside your facility?
There's very little fumes that come off of that. If you walk into it, you just don't smell the fumes. There's hardly anything in it. It's all contained within the paint itself. It smells
is there
like
something
a
like
paint
a
shop, I guess.
fume hood over these 10 tanks?
No, there's no fume hood. No. At night we cover them. And
How
that's
do you
about it.
collect the vapors that get sent up wherever they get sent?
You mean in the oven when we cure it?
Is that where the vapors?
That's where the vapors come off. It comes off during the curing process. That's when the paint particles do their cross-linking and the solvent is flashed off of the paint.
So there's no really fumes associated with the 10 tank process?
No.
Just with the baking?
Yes, sir.
And that is vented to a stack that just vents up out of your
Off the
roof?
roof. Yes, sir.
if it's not a proprietary information, what are the ROCs that are in this product?
Now that I can tell you.
Well, I guess I'm asking the vendor, that unless you are not comfortable telling us that.
Can I tell you? Or I would just tell you. Does that matter?
Toluene, xylene, and glycol.
Toluene?
Mhm.
Okay. I don't have any further questions for the petitioner.
Thank you, Mr. Hurlock. Do any other members of the board have any further questions of the petitioner?
Does the district have any questions for the petitioner?
Yes, I think we probably will. We do need to make a clarification or correction in the draft ordinance. We've identified your current coating as being subject to a 420 gram per liter limit. We were just looking at our rule 74.18, and it should be subject to a 340 gram per liter limit. The 420 gram per liter limit is for automotive coatings where there's a color match that's required. And this really comes down to typical automotive coating operation. We don't think that a color match, as was intended in the rule, is applicable here. So we think it should be a 340 gram.
Is that under the multi-stage coat section? Or is that under, under prime sealer?
It's considered to be a single stage, non-metallic, non-iridescent top coat. And in section B1 of our rule,
It's 420.
it specifies those coating limits for color match requirements, where there is a color match. In section B2 of our rule, specifies the limits where there's no color match required. And the non-metallic, non-iridescent top coats are listed there as 340 gram per liter. What's happening in our rule revision is that we're doing away with these two different color match and non-color match, and we're putting a specific limit into the coating that we're using. So their coating is going to be listed as an electrophoretic coating for vehicle brake components, a very specific coating just for their operation, and that's going to have a 440 gram per liter limit. So we're just gonna have to make a correction to the draft order for this one. Does that make sense?
Do you have any, it does, I want to ask you something about that, but before I do you have any questions of the petitioner? Wish
Yeah,
to ask.
just a few. I'd like to go through and try and flesh out some of the findings that have to be made. In your variance petition, there was some reference made to having parts coated in Mexico. Could you explain that a little bit more as to what you intend to do?
We basically are aware of a vendor that does this process in Mexico. Unfortunately, the transportation charges to do something like that, especially in the volumes that we're talking about, just make it unrealistic. We manufacture about 2,000 different part numbers, basically, a different brake component for every car since, the 1950s. So they're relatively small quantities for each part number. And shipping it back and forth to Mexico just doesn't make economic sense. We just could not compete in the market with those charges. And we also believe that the air pollution would actually be worse if you consider those truck miles versus what we're trying to accomplish here.
If the hearing board refused to grant you variance and if the rule isn't adopted, would you have to fall back on that as an alternative then?
I'm assuming for short term we would have to do that and continue on looking at our vendor to help us out and to come up with a coating that does work and is within the current regulations. We would basically have a choice to make to not make money or possibly lose money until we could get that process going just to stay in the marketplace.
Okay. How many people are employed in your business?
Approximately 240.
Would you be agreeable to reporting your production or use of the clear clad material on a monthly basis?
Yes, we would.
And those are the only questions that I have.
Thank you, Mr. Duvall. Does the board have any questions for the district?
Yes.
Ms. Nicewander?
You're changing the rule to create a special rule just for this company.
Yes, a special coding category just for their coding operation.
Why?
At the time that our rule engineer was made aware of this, and I think he had some discussion with maybe Mr. Bull, felt that that would be the most expeditious and also would still provide a very good solid emission limit that we could substantiate. From what I understand, the alternative might be using a two-part system that might actually have higher emissions but might comply with the limit. Just in the way that the coatings are, the coating organic content is calculated. The alternative might actually yield higher emissions.
The alternative being the two-stage process. This is a rulemaking issue, and it's probably not for our board, but I see it as an extraordinarily dangerous precedent to carve out one company and create a rule for them. You want to comment on that for me?
Well, we do it when we really have to do it, because we are dealing with some very unique technological issues in some of these rulemaking. It's not the first time that we've done that, and rather than putting the company at risk, putting the business at risk, and potentially creating maybe more emissions, we feel that it's best to just carve out a little niche for them.
Well, why can't we? Again, rulemaking is not our function, but rather than carving out a rule for them, they've already indicated that they've got another company, the company that produces this material is looking at some experimental products that could bring it down to the 340 range, 360 range, therefore being compliant within a short period of time. Why can't we simply issue the variance for the period of a year, which is, I believe, what they're looking for, and then if they don't have a new material from the manufacturer within a year, which it looks as if we will, then there's no need for the rule change. I mean, I have no problem with this variance. What I have a problem with, I guess, is the rule change for one company, which I just see as putting the cart before the horse. But those are my comments. I guess those are more than, you've answered my questions, so thank you.
Do any other members of the board have questions for the district?
Does the district know how, if and how South Coast is dealing with this particular product, with this process?
I don't know how they're dealing with it.
Oh.
I'm not aware that they have any unique or special coding categories for this process.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the representative, do you know the answer to that question?
How LA's doing it?
Yes.
We went through testing procedures with Los Angeles County. I think it was in the early 90s, and we paid a substantial amount of money to go through testing with the county, and with the same coatings, and they said we were fine. I mean, I've got the details from that. I mean, I can supply that.
So as far as the South Coast Air Quality Management District is concerned, this ClearClad HSR product is compliant with
their
their
limits, yes.
with their rules.
I have a couple of questions for the district and perhaps for the petitioner. When I saw this 400, that the Rule 7418 specifies that the ROC content of single-stage non-metallic, non-iridescent top coats shall not exceed 420 grams per liter, and the petitioner's product is at 440 grams per liter, and I saw that there was going to be a rule revision meeting tomorrow. My assumption was that they were only 20 grams per liter off and that you would probably lower it to 420. But now that you're saying it really should not exceed 340 grams per liter, should I still be making that assumption?
The rule revision.
You're going to
The revision.
you're going to make it more generous now?
The revision that is going to the board tomorrow will set a 440 gram per liter limit for these electrophoretic coatings
Instead of 340.
instead of 340. It's going to set the limit at what their current coating is at.
On the basis that this is only one company and it's not a significant impact on air quality?
Yeah, on the basis that it was very low emission rate in total to start with.
Because of the throughput is relatively small.
Right, low throughput. I think at the time, back in August or September, when we started talking about this, we were under the impression that the alternative, the two-stage coating, would actually maybe yield higher overall emissions than the single stage.
And that was my second question. How does that work? Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, are you saying if the petitioner is saying because each stage of the two-stage coating in and by itself would be compliant, but when added together, is that what the petition says? Would actually exceed the 440 or the 420 more than they're emitting right now?
My understanding is that the coating that they're using right now is a concentrate, and it's made up at 90 parts water, 10 parts coating material. The two-part system has a total reactive organic content. It's not a dilute solution. It's not a dilute solution that requires a lot of makeup, water. So
Like the current solution that's being used?
not take into account whether it's diluted with water or non-reactive organic compounds. It's on what we call a minus basis. So in the case of the concentrated liquid, 10% is at 420 grams,
440.
or 40 grams per liter.
That's if you just open the container and let it evaporate.
That they're blending it with, they're blending, let's say, 1 gallon of that with 9 gallons.
Not 90% water, correct?
Right.
In the two-part system, my understanding is that it has, that the base has a lower ROC content, but it's not blended to the 9-to-1 volume. So when you do the calculations on this minus basis, the current coating comes out to have a lower total overall emission. And
Well,
I'll look at them to
shouldn't,
clarify the phone.
excuse me if I'm wrong, but shouldn't we be concerned with the total overall emissions of the process rather than am I missing something here? Rather than the undiluted emissions, that's kind of really not pertinent, is it?
Well, what we want to do
Since it's always diluted in use, the current stuff that they're using.
what we do in the way that we calculate our ROC emissions is we remove the ability for companies to intentionally dilute a coating. So for a company to say, well, I'm applying it, the way I'm applying it, it complies with the limit, but they're adding a lot of water or a lot of these solids to it, it's diluted. And so we're trying to set an even playing field so companies can't dilute a product to make it compliant. So we're looking at
Well, the paradox for me is that the compliant process would produce more emissions,
that's right,
if I understand you correctly.
that's right.
Does that really make sense?
I think we should ask this, because I'm not sure that's true.
Am I understanding that correctly? I mean, that's what it said in
Yeah.
writing in the petition.
Absolutely.
I want to hear from our engineer on the board.
I'm glad the question was actually asked because in my position, as you know from last year, I sometimes ask too many questions that get me into trouble. But I think Mr. Duvall has answered your question, and I was concerned about the issue of, well, once I knew it was 90% water and nothing more than that, and that's why I was asking about the rinsing and the process and the number of tanks, is that you don't want to create or set limits that are going to force industries. This is the only one apparently in this area that does this kind of work. You don't want to force the industries to sidestep by diluting as part of the operations. And that was my understanding, and I'm glad you clarified that.
I've got one final question for the district. So to get into compliance over the next year, what level does the petitioner need to get the product that it's using for this process down to 340 grams per liter?
Well, if our rule revision is adopted tomorrow,
It would be 440.
the limit would be 440, which is the limit that they're currently at.
So hence, Ms. Nicewinder's question, why are they here? If
Well, Willwood submitted their variance petition a little over 2 months ago. And at that time, we were on kind of a parallel path, a kind of a slow parallel path to revise our automotive coatings rule. We weren't sure how the variance petition timing would play out with how the rule revision adoption hearing would play out. So we probably should have had this hearing
maybe 3 weeks ago, but we had 2 other hearings 2 weeks ago. And at the same time, the revisions to our automotive coatings rule got put on a little bit faster track. So here we are, kind of on the same date almost. But what the variance would do for the petitioner is to allow us to use our enforcement discretion for this past time period that they've been in violation. So kind of in a long story around, that's how we got here.
Thank you. Ms. Nicewinder, looks like she has another question.
This is frustrating because our board does not have the authority to deal with the rulemaking process. But it is my understanding that we do rules just a little bit ahead of the curve in order to encourage people to come into a higher level of compliance so that we breathe easier, right?
Correct.
So here we have a situation where a company is using a type of material that is in fact better than a 2-stage coating. It should in fact be approved for use. But we could get a variance because it's a single company. We can give them a variance for the next year, not change the rule, and within that variance period, the manufacturer is going to come out with a better product that's actually going to be less than the 440. If you pass this rule tomorrow, there will be no incentive to come up with a 340 grams per liter material. But this is completely outside the scope of our board. So I'm doing what I hate people doing, which is digress. So I'm going to stop talking here. But that's just my thought on the idea. I don't oppose the variance, but I do oppose the rule.
It's understood.
Mr. Duvall, I just have one final question for the district. If do you anticipate that tomorrow, when you have this rule revision meeting, that the rule 7418 will be changed from 420 to 440 grams per liter?
That's our expectation. We haven't
That's your recommendation to the board?
That's our recommendation. We haven't heard any opposition to the rule that would stop the rule from being adopted.
So one final question. So your primary reason for recommending that the board grant this petition is that it would give you discretionary enforcement powers?
In large part, yes.
Thank you. Do any other members of the board have, Mr. Herlock?
I have one question just to clarify my own understanding. I think this is going to be for the petitioner with regard to all the VOCs and the better than and worse than. My understanding is that for your process and for the 2-part process, when you pull these parts out and they're ready to go into the oven, they're wet with paint or whatever you want to call it. And that wetness in your product is 440 parts per gallon. If you put on a 10-micron coating and somebody else puts on a 10-micron coating of the 2-part, theirs has 50 plus 20 or something like that. So I don't see it that this is going to produce less emissions. Am I misunderstanding or missing something?
I think what you're missing is that, how can I use an analogy? If I gave you a bag of concrete and say you can use that, but you can't add no water to it, it's useless. My paint comes in a resin form that, I was going to ask this question anyways, back at the factory, if I did a premix back there and sent it to you, it would be well under 440. But since we take the water out of it and we sell it as a concentrate, it looks like it's got 440 grams per liter. Does that help at all?
Isn't that concentrate what ends up on the product in the 10-micron layer that Mr. Stefan described?
It does, but it's a diluted factor now.
No.
Sure.
It doesn't have any water in it.
Yeah, it does have water.
Oh, okay.
But once it goes on the product, the VOCs or ROCs do not come off that part until it's cross-linked in an oven. So you don't get the fumes off of that until it's baked.
It's not quite as simple as I said. Yeah, thank you.
Do any board members have any further questions of the district or the petitioner? Mr. Gasparino.
Yes, I have one question now. Yeah, it's come to mind with regards to the change that might occur tomorrow, do you anticipate that there will be questions regarding the change, or will you offer anything in terms of what we discussed tonight?
Are you suggesting that we would make a recommendation to our board based on the I guess, could you clarify that question?
Well, I guess since I've never been in this predicament before, and I guess the question would be is that because we have the issue that's been expressed clearly by Ms. Nicewinder tonight, and I think most of us kind of feel the same way, yet they're going to go ahead and possibly adopt the new grams per liter of 440. Is it the district's responsibility to convey anything that was discussed here tonight during this particular variance?
Boy, I hadn't even thought of this until 30 minutes ago. And
Sorry? The short answer is no, because you're not an advisory commissioner board. You're just a solely hearing board on the variance before you. Any of you are free to make public comment, as anyone from the public is tomorrow but there's no burden on the district to bring your comments to bear at a rulemaking meeting.
I've got one final question, just for the record. I'd like to get this on the record. The district is comfortable with raising the ROC emissions limit from 420 to 440 grams per liter in this particular instance.
yes, we are.
From 340 to 440, right.
Correct.
Thank you. Do any members of the board have any further questions of the district or the petitioner?
Do any members of the public wish to testify or comment on this matter? Okay, hearing that, I will call this hearing closed. Is there any discussion by the board?
Do I have a motion concerning the petition?
I'll move to approve it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
One comment.
Oh,
You'll need to have the changes made where it's 420 to 340, I guess, on page 3 of the rule requirements and findings of fact, where the reference is to 74 118B2. There's one there at that line at the end of the rule requirements. Should be 340 grams per liter, and then down in number 1 below that. Also needs to be not more than 340 grams per liter.
So we'll modify the motion to indicate that move to approve the order as written, except with the exception of modifying the rule reference and the 420 down to 340 grams per liter.
will the clerk please call the roll? Aye.
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 Aye. Your petition has been granted. Thank you for coming. Our second petition tonight is petition number 805. This is the petition of the Barnett Tool and Engineering for a regular variance from APCD Rule 7420, adhesives and sealants.
He stood up.
Good evening. Would you please identify yourself for the record?
My name is Mike Taylor. I'm the president owner of Barnett's One Engineering.
Thank you, Mike. Would you please present us your petition?
Yes. I'll go over a little bit of what we do. We manufacture motorcycle parts for all types of motorcycles, ATVs. And our two main products are control cables and clutch components. And one of our main products that we make for clutches are clutch plates, bonded friction clutch plates. And that's what we're here about here tonight. We've been in business since 1948, and it's a family business. We employ right now about 50 employees. And we moved up to Ventura from Southern California, from actually Santa Fe Springs in 1998, December 1998. And we pretty much brought our operation up here pretty much the same way we do it all those years from the south. The different process that we're discussing here tonight, we basically send out metal cores, aluminum or steel, treat them, steel plates, we send to a place down in Los Angeles where they dip them in it's called a phosphate etching process. The aluminum plates we tumble, we burn at our facility that put a texture on it, deburr them. And then we coat them, we use a thermal setting, phenolic rosin, and adhesive to bond the friction material to the metal core. And basically that's what we've been doing. That's what we essentially, I've been with the company since 1968, and we've been, for all practical purposes, doing them exactly the same way all the time I've been there and before I came to work there. That's pretty much it. We coat both the paper. We use actually friction paper, and we coat the paper with adhesive. We coat the metal cores with a primer, and then we mate them together, put them in a jig under pressure, cure them for 30 to 40 minutes, about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and at that time they are pretty much completed. We just as soon clean them, deburr them, clean them up, and they go back. I told you we employ about 50 employees. I can't think of anything else as far as describing it. We do some other things for motorcycle parts, but cables and clutches, between the two of them, 95% of our business.
Thank you, Mike. Do any members of the board have any questions for the petitioner? I have a question. Can you, just for the record, can you, just so we're sure that you understand where the violation occurred, can you state in what part of the procedure you're violating this rule 74 or 20?
Yeah, the violation is that we've been using non-compliant adhesive and primer. And I think originally another solvent was on a methyl ketone, MEK, that we were using, which we've since discontinued. We don't use it anymore. And but anyways, unbeknownst to us, they were non-compliant again. When we moved our business up here, we basically brought our operation up and set it up the same way we were doing down there.
Thank you. Mr. Gasparino, you have a question?
I have some questions of you, Mr. Taylor. Do other companies similar to yours, and maybe there are none in Southern California, do they operate the same way you do?
I don't know of any other in California. Our main competition, there's a company back in Alabama that makes automotive and motorcycle clutch plates, and most of our competition is imported stuff. As far as I know, there might be. It's similar. The technology and everything that we do is very similar to brake relining. So there might be something related that way, because they basically do the same kind of
Okay. Could you tell me why Barnett decided to move from Santa Fe up into Ventura County? Lifestyle. Okay. It wasn't because the air requirements were less at that time? Okay.
My wife and I had purchased property in Carpentria.
Okay, thank you. How many employees do you employ?
Right now, around 50. It'll
50?
fluctuate between 50 and 60, but just the way the economy is, this is right now, we're kind of low.
Okay. In terms of curtailment, I think the response was total curtailment would mean shutting down, and that would be a significant impact, or you'd have to close the doors. Is there any way that you could do less than a full shutdown?
Yeah, we probably could. Again, historically, our business averages out with our cable business and electric business pretty much divided evenly as far as what our total sales are per year. The last couple of years, it's gone more towards the clutch component simply because the custom motorcycle market is really dried up, and the guys aren't out there buying $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 motorcycles like they were a few years ago. And so the custom cable line and all that is more of a luxury than a necessity. My father-in-law started the business, and he was pretty smart in coming up with a couple of things that are consumable items. Both of these products that we make and some of the other stuff we make are things that just by their design wear out and have to be replaced from time to time. And clutches more so than cables, but so there, that part of the business has been more steady than the cable part. But we wouldn't shut down probably totally altogether. We'd be down to the skeleton force and have let most of the people go, because our other departments support both the cable and the clutch department. As far as we have other screw machines and punch press and CNC, but they all make parts that go into the manufacture of the final product.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious about that. Appreciate it.
Mr. Hurlock.
Yes, I have a couple.
I'm sorry, Ms. Nicewinder, you were next. Go ahead.
When did you move up from Santa Fe Springs?
December 1998.
And did you have an AQMD permit in Los Angeles County? That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Hurlock.
Yes, Mr. Taylor. I didn't quite understand whether your facility has any permits at all, or just doesn't have a permit for this operation.
Other than business permits and all that.
I mean, what permit with the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District? How did it happen that you had one in South Coast, but you didn't get one when you moved up here?
When we moved up here, we applied for the various business permits that we needed and set up our operation. We've been inspected every year by the fire department when OSHA's been out, and it just at one time I was told by an engineer guy that we consulted before we moved up here that permits weren't required for it. Because what we have is one of the ways we've been applying this adhesive is a spray booth, and that's what we had. We've got two of them, and we had the permits of those spray booths down with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And I think I submitted the paperwork to the when I turned the paper, all the stuff I said I gave copies of those when I sent that in. But we just never known there was a requirement to do anything like that. I'm not saying that's a good excuse, but that was just the way it was. We didn't always have one down there. We had one because we've been in business so long that for at least for quite a few years in Santa Fe Springs for 19 years before we moved up here, and before that we were in Vernon, and we'd never had anything like that in Vernon. But there for a period of time before we moved up here from Santa Fe Springs, we had the permits. We had to renew them once a year, and we gave them a report on the usage at that time. It wasn't the same materials that we used down there.
And is it your recollection that those permits were for spray booths?
Spray booths, yeah.
And did you bring the spray booths with you?
Yeah.
But you didn't get them permitted up here?
I had no idea they were even required to be permitted
But you use something other than spray booths currently, is that correct?
That's, but we almost don't even use them anymore. We roller do it now. Because we changed our process around. So we have a machine that actually, we run the sheet through it and puts material.
But do you still have and use spray booths
Yeah. Yes.
for these two same solvents?
Yeah, although we are pretty much, since all this has come up, we've been working on finding materials, and we have also in the past few years, we've changed over a lot to a adhesive film, which is totally compliant, and there's no DOCs. It comes in a roll, we laminate it to the paper, and then we cut the paper up, stretch the paper up to place. But, and also now we're using we've already changed over and we're using a water soluble or water-based material called Aqualot 6000, which is a compliant material. And we're using that for the primer on the laminate material. And we've done a lot of testing. We're just about very close. I know we've asked for this almost a year variance request, and but we're at the point now where we have been testing and using this water-based adhesive, and all of our in-house testing is perfect. We have no bonding failures. What we're waiting to get down, one of the trouble we're getting into now is the off-season and the cold weather coming on. We've got to get these things tested in a motorcycle, out on the road, out on a racetrack. And because anything we do in-house is more theoretical than anything we can do. And we actually have to get them in the bike and make sure they're not going to come apart.
So the laminate process is not in production at your plant at the moment?
It is, to some extent, yeah. We've already switched over. We have been using, what we have been using on more than half of our production is a film, solid film, the laminate that we put on. But we have been using it in conjunction with a product called SEV 1000, which is the primer that I listed in here. But now we're using it with this Aqualot 6000, which is a water-based compliant material. They are compatible. That was one of the things we didn't know. We had to find out.
So if this petition were not to be granted tonight, what would you do tomorrow or quickly?
We would be, we wouldn't be dead in the water, but we'd be drowning. And we couldn't keep up with the production with the way we're doing it right now at half the line. We can't make them fast. Early last December, November, December, we built a machine and that totally changes the way we manufacture our parts. We used to put a solid ring on the material and with a heat press coin slots in it now, and that was a fairly good way to do it. It was a good way to do it because we did it for a lot of years, but it was not very efficient, had a lot of scrap material. Now we've changed it and we put individual friction pads in each plate, and by doing that we save a lot more adhesive. We save we went from 70% scrap on the friction material down to like 10%. So it's all cost effective, and in addition that made a better product for us. But now I got samples here if you'd like to see those. But we have been waiting to get this variance before we start testing or anything like that. We've been working on this. We got rid of the MEK totally that we were using. That was another thing when we came up here. They told us, I think the fire department or somebody told us we couldn't use acetone. So we haven't. Then I understand that's actually okay to use, but we don't even have to use that now. One of the nice things about this water-soluble adhesive is that it's soap and water cleanup. There's no solvents required. So we're all, we're pretty excited about changing over to that.
Thank you.
Do any other members of the board have any further questions of the petitioner? Do any members of the board have any questions for the district? Mr. Gasparino?
I have a question of the district, and please excuse my ignorance. It was basically the district was unaware of the operation. Is there a process by which the district is made aware of a certain business coming into the area that might alert them to checking out the facility instead of waiting for a long period of time and finding out that they're operating without a permit?
Well, we have several different ways that we learn about new businesses. One of those is just the inspector. We assign our inspectors to areas, and just by being in those areas quite a bit, they're aware of new businesses coming into that area. In this case, we had a recent shift in inspectors, and so I think maybe a fresh set of eyes may have caught Barnett. But then also there is, in state law, requirements that building departments have to send their applicants for zoning clearances to us to get sign-offs before they grant building permits. And we refer to it as the AB 3205 process. And some building departments are really good at it. Others kind of could do better. And sometimes it's just hit or miss, but that process is intended to prevent, in some instances, this from happening. If it's a brand new construction, we typically see that sign-off come through to us. But if somebody just rents an empty building that's been there for a number of years as a warehouse or some innocuous operation, and company moves in, doesn't have to go to the city for building permits or zoning clearance, then that process may fall apart and we may not see them come through the city to us. So I'm not sure what the circumstance was with that AB 3205 and Barnett tool. But so we do have kind of those two things working for us, but you know, sometimes it works and other times it doesn't work like it should.
The last question would be, is there any consideration on the district's part to look at any penalties for the excessive emissions?
And as part of this variance, Barnett would be providing us with their non-compliant primer and adhesive use until they do come into compliance, and we would be assessing excess emission fees on that.
Does the district have any questions for the petitioner?
Maybe just a couple. You're in the process of trying to fully develop this use of the laminate material, and I understand that you think you can go to about 90% of your production using the laminate.
Yeah, using a combination of the laminate and the water-based adhesive, we'll go to 100%. And it's not going to take as long as this variance that we requested. It's not going to take that long. We're getting pretty doggone close right now.
How close is close if you were to put it on a...
We're at the point now where the only thing that's holding us up is field testing. It's getting them in a bike and various kinds of bikes, off-road dirt. In March, our big season starts in Daytona, the Daytona Bike Week. There's lots of motorcycle races down there. We'll have people down there having these things at bikes, testing them in actual race bikes. And then even right now, we've got bikes in the streets with these
if you were to put your product out without testing it and it fails, what would happen to your company?
The worst possible scenario is for these plates to come undone in an engine. And 90% of motorcycles run on a unit construction engine where the clutch runs in the same oil that the rest of the engine runs in. And I speak from experience because this has happened before to some degree, but because it's easy, because we didn't do a good job. But if these spacings come off, they just pretty much disintegrate and ground up. They plug up the oil filter, the pickup, stars the engine for oil, and it burns the engine. It's something nobody can afford to have that happen. Either the cost of the repairs or the cost of your reputation for doing something like that.
Okay. I heard you earlier say that you've eliminated the use of methyl ethyl ketone in your process. Okay, good. And those are all the questions that I had.
Thank you, Mr. Duvall. I have a couple of questions I want to ask the district before we wrap this up. Doesn't acetone have its own issues?
It has issues in that it's flammable, and it does have to be used carefully. The fire department sometimes becomes concerned about its use and that there's proper ventilation where it's being used. Acetone is a non-reactive organic compound, so it's dangerous to use if it's not used correctly, but when it's used correctly, it's not a matter for our ozone formation.
Thank you, Mr. Duvall. And I've got one final question, and that is this Henkel PL605-4 adhesive. You say Barnett's been using about 700 gallons per year of this non-compliant adhesive, and the estimated ROC excess emissions from this adhesive are 3,057 pounds per year. Is the district comfortable with that volume of this particular non-compliant? I mean, granted, once Mr. Taylor makes the change, they won't be using it, but
and I think based on what we've stated in our letter, and I think what Mr. Taylor's indicated, that they've actually reduced quite a bit of that material use, the adhesive use already. And I think in our letter we indicate that amount of excess emission is an overestimation of what they're really emitting.
Thank you, Mr. Duvall. I have no further questions. Do any members of the board have any further questions of the district or the petitioner?
Hearing that, I'm going to call this hearing closed. Is there any discussion by the board? Ms. Nicewinder?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. First of all, I have some amount of sympathy for Barnett in that system in Ventura County has been under attack lately, is not providing a lot of input to applicants as to what they need to get as far as permits are concerned. It's not coordinated. So you could walk into the county and get one piece of advice one day and one piece of advice a different day, and they're completely different. So the fact that y'all didn't get notice does not surprise me. But it's been 10 years. It's been 10 years. So a new inspector shouldn't have done that. That's a long time. So I do have a certain amount of sympathy, as I said, for Barnett, because, you know, they didn't get told you got to go get an APCD permit. But on the other hand, they had an AQMD permit down in LA. So the applicant knew or should have known to at least be thinking about air quality issues, and didn't. The amount of the excess emissions bothers me because it seems very significant to me. And we're giving them a variance. It's going to last until September of next year. Again, that's a long time. So I would suggest to my fellow board members that perhaps we modify this to give them a shorter variance period, just to keep the heat on. Because I think there's a certain amount of, if Barnett were totally blameless in this, that they just got bad advice, that's one thing. But they had an AQMD permit down in LA. So if we shorten up the variance period, it does provide an incentive to move more quickly. That would be my suggestion. I would love to hear from y'all.
Comments by other board members to Ms. Nicewinder's proposal?
I think I would normally agree, but I think that Mr. Taylor's comment about they're almost there with regards to the changing of the process to become compliant kind of satisfied where I was going on that whole issue.
Thank you, Mr. Gasparino. How do you feel about it, Mr. Herlock?
I think that's definitely a consideration. If we do that, we probably have to maybe reopen the hearing to get some input on that. I would, but on the other hand, if we don't do that, we're basically trusting the petitioner to get it done as quick as he says he will, which we sometimes do. So I'm not real strong either way on that.
Well, I think we also have staff, the requirements for reporting. I think the district has a fair feel for the fact that we want them to move as quickly as possible, so I'm sure the district staff certainly will apply continued pressure on them.
My own personal position on it, I thought about this also when I was reviewing this over the weekend. I agree with Ms. Nicewinder's comments, but I'm not sure, as members of the board, that we really should. I mean, some of us who've seen many petitioners come before this board have seen instances where petitioners had, in fact, operated without a permit to operate for quite some time and had significant emissions. And my assumption here is that the district had, if it were really that concerned about the level of emissions that we're talking about here, would have made an issue about it and probably recommended more draconian measures than what we see here. I guess in the big picture, Barnett's emissions are not insignificant, but it's not a significant impact. There's no residences anywhere or schools anywhere nearby. I hear what Ms. Nicewinder is saying. I think the petitioner should have known, having come from Santa Fe Springs, which is in the smog belt. Am I correct? Yeah. But I don't know if whether that's. I think it's just simply beyond what we really need to be looking at right now. I also am kind of perplexed why we're giving the petitioners so long, but because the petitioner has reassured us that they're almost there now, switching over to the laminate coating. I don't know if it would really serve the public interest to try to change what the staff has recommended, that how we respond to this, and have to come back for another meeting. So my own feeling is I think we should approve the petition as written. Any more comments from the board? May I hear a motion concerning the petition?
I move to grant the petition. I also have one minor change. It's a typo on page 4 below section item 4. It should be their reputation, THEIR.
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
Other than that.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Gasparino?
Aye.
Ms. Nicewinder?
Aye.
Mr. Herlock?
Aye.
And Mr. Stubblefield?
Aye. Mr. Taylor, your petition is granted. Do we have any other items to discuss tonight?
Election, it's not on the agenda. We'll schedule election of chair and vice chair for next meeting.
Okay.
No pending hearings that we're aware of.
I have a comment relative to something that's not germane to either of these hearings, but it's part of the testimony. I have some experience with laminate coatings, and I know they're considered to be not ROC, but the ones I used were really stinky, so much so I had to put them outside and lock them up in a closed chest to avoid the complaints, and even then I got complaints. So the fact that it's a solid and not a liquid doesn't mean that it doesn't emit a lot of vapors. So, and I hope that the district representatives somehow communicate the board's concerns, especially Ms. Neiswender's concerns regarding the rule issue that was discussed tonight.
And I have a kind of a comment and hold on, Gary, a comment and a question of the district, but I know the district is undoubtedly aware of the still that the former 3M and now then later renamed Imation set up to recover 98% of its solvents.
That's correct.
For when it produced magnetic recording tape, and now they've left.
Correct.
What is the status of that? They spent $1 million, several $1 million on that thing.
They that coating system, well, the what we call the solvent recovery unit is probably at least 15 years old. At the time, it was state of the art. It continued to operate with stellar control results. We've been working with Imation for probably, well, since they announced that they were closing the plant, and we've worked with them on a method to basically shut down the facility. They're continuing to operate the solvent recovery unit to this day until they get their process areas to what they consider to be solvent-free. So they're doing that in stages, and then they're going into the solvent-free areas. They're taking them out of the control system, going in, and then taking equipment out and shutting off the electronics and such. They've hired an environmental consulting firm out of, I want to say New Jersey. I may hate to say New Jersey, but they've brought in a consulting company to help them deal with whatever contamination may be in place there, to get the building closed up. Eventually, I think the building's going to be demolished, but they are continuing to operate that solvent recovery unit. And it's done a really good job.
The reason I'm asking about it is I know I was on the Project XL
That's right.
oversight committee. We were kind of like watchdogs when they were part of Project XL. And I know that the company officials told everybody during that period that this was all open architecture. They were willing to share how they did it with anybody. And I don't think there ever were any takers because that particular system was set up for a certain scale that was perhaps too large for any other local firms. But I'm curious, couldn't that same technology be applied for petitioners like both of the petitioners tonight to recover their solvents and reuse it and keep it from entering the atmosphere at all?
The type similar technologies to what Imation has been using are in place. What they're doing is they're using a carbon absorption system, and then they're steam stripping out the solvents and putting those back into a solvent tank and reusing those solvents. And but even on a very small scale, it's quite expensive, and you have to have quite a bit of emissions in order to make it cost effective. But there are some businesses, maybe a couple in Ventura County, that are high emissions, but nowhere near what Imation is, that are using technology similar to that. But when you get down to the level of Barnett and Willwood, it's just way too expensive to put in that carbon system and then steam to strip out the solvents out of the carbon and regenerate the carbon. And you have to have dual redundant carbon beds to be able to do it. So it gets quite expensive.
But perhaps that particular plant, that whole facility is going to be vacant in the
Yes.
near future. Perhaps the district and maybe the county could get businesses like that to all group over there. It's an enormous facility, so that they could share the costs of, and it's already there. Are they going to dismantle it?
My understanding is that they're going to take that facility down to bare dirt and look at trying to sell the property.
No comment.
Yeah, City of Camarillo is going to build another extension of the outlet mall, I think, over in that area. You know, if I may, just real quick, I know everybody's anxiously. The reason I asked the question about the process of when businesses come in, because I believe the district is doing a real good job, as I do believe most of the petitioners have good intentions to try to become compliant. There have been a few exceptions that I've seen, and you know, here we are in 2008, and it bothers me to know that there's still barriers or partitions between different organizations within the county agencies where we don't know if somebody's moved in and they're operating without a permit. And I don't, it's not our, I guess, our responsibility, but somehow that's just unsatisfactory.
Have you been following the Tom Bird report on the county partner? It's interesting, because that's one of the things that you get a lot, you hear a lot from people that actually try to come to the county for advice, is that there's not a lot of coordination between the parks. And that you don't you don't come to a single planning encounter and they say, okay, here's what you're doing. Yeah, they don't do that, and it makes it really hard for the applicants. But it's, apparently they're trying to do something about it. How much progress they're making over time.
Don't all these sources have one thing in common, and that's a business license? There's gotta be
No,
more than just a business
no,
license.
because I get my business license from the city of Ventura, and the county is a completely different entity, and that's, you know, that's one of
Well,
the
it's
issues.
still only 11 entities, it's 10 cities in one county.
But every city office that issues business permits could essentially be required to send somebody who comes in to get a permit to come talk to the APCD.
Or the district could,
I mean, unless they're selling insurance or something, but I mean, if you're a manufacturer of any sort.
Yeah. A couple of the cities give us monthly, I think it is, copies of their business licenses to give them. And then also, every couple of years, I send a letter out to the planning directors and the building officials, reminding them of the state law requirement to send their clients to our way, and you might get a couple for a month, and then that falls apart again. But it's been, for us, it's been a frustrating process.
I bet.
You have to formally adjourn our meeting. I think you have to formally adjourn our meeting.
We haven't done that.
If there's no further discussion, tonight's meeting is adjourned at 7 o'clock.